There are moments in Frontiers of Pandora where you'd be forgiven for thinking it's a joyous, free-flowing adventure. Soaring through the skies on your Ikran, spying new sights and new targets to take down to restore life to the land. But these moments are the peak of an otherwise incredibly generic open world. The world of Avatar Pandora is the perfect backdrop for a game like this, so it's a shame that the play space is scattered with repetitive content and muddied by seemingly unnecessary restrictions. You might try to fly to a distant location, only to hit one of those annoying invisible walls and have to turn around. The immersion that should have carried the game to great heights is often tarnished by unseen barriers, and the progression is too stiff and numbers-based to be as fun as it could have been. Frontiers of Pandora has been compared to other big Ubisoft titles so closely that some have even called it a clone, but if this is Far Cry, it's Far Cry with a bit more soul to it. The world is more immersive, the gameplay is more natural, and it's not simply relying on the strength of its villains to tell a worthwhile story. The characters may not be incredibly compelling, but the environments they inhabit are worth seeing. But that said, the comparisons are unavoidable. I don't like spending too much time in reviews comparing games to each other, but this is Ubisoft's open world formula that we've been playing for the last decade with a Pandoran sheen. You aren't going to be surprised by the gameplay that awaits you in Frontiers of Pandora. From destroying outposts to hunting animals, this adventure plays things safe and does little to innovate. But let's get into some specifics, shall we? Pandora is this game's main draw, and it is gorgeous. This is not your average looking open world setting. It is magnificent to look at. It's filled with little details, and it's a perfect playground to let your Navi loose. Between towering alien trees, you'll find neon lizards floating through moonlit glades, or roots stretching from the earth like great worms frozen in place. Floating islands hang in the air, adding a sense of enormity to the land at large. The upper plains are breathtaking and bring to mind the vastness of Hyrule's fields in The Legend of Zelda. Now, clearly, the beauty doesn't always flourish under the RDA's attempted takeover. Billowing smoke signals danger in the distance, and the near grayscale shade of these polluted areas is striking. It's an emotive contrast designed to drive you towards restoring life to these stretches of tortured terrain. And then there are the sounds, from the satisfying thwip of spiraling plants that shrink as you pass through them, to the pitter-patter of your own feet on wet turf, or birds screeching in the distance. The audio makes Pandora feel alive as you gracefully leap above trees or cross through dense thickets. Your Navi feels good to control too, with enough weight to feel strong and nimble movement to help you navigate nature with ease. And the environmental design here. The environments are on another level. They're packed with detail in all corners of the map. At any point, you can stop and find a screenshot-worthy site or intriguing alien plant to investigate. And let me tell you, when you finally get your Ikran mount, the world truly opens up. So there's a lot to love here. There's a lot to get excited about, but it's disappointing then when you realise how much generic content awaits within this open world. Frontiers of Pandora has plenty of open world staples, from outposts dotted around the map to hunting and gathering mechanics. You are going to have largely played parts of this game before. Now, these features do actually fit into the story that Frontiers of Pandora tries to tell, fighting back against invasive oppressors, using the land's natural resources. These are things the Navi naturally would be doing, but that doesn't always mean it's fun though. This isn't like Breath of the Wild, where picking up materials takes a single button press on the go. Many resources require a brief minigame where you figure out the right direction to yank them free. Whether that's a good thing or not depends on how slow-paced you like your adventure games to be, but it wasn't the vibe for me. The world is chock full of random collectibles and tasks to work towards. A quick glance at the achievement list reveals a gargantuan number of things to do, some of which really aren't worth focusing on. Touching plants to get skill points or minor health upgrades, finding audio logs or notes, these are tasks that you're going to naturally stumble into sometimes, but going for a 100% completion is not exactly an appealing offer. You see, Frontiers of Pandora is both relaxing and mundane, and certainly not anything new. It takes tried and tested mechanics and applies them to the stunning vistas of Pandora, instantly elevating the generic gameplay tasks by placing them in a world that is a lot nicer to look at. And to be fair, it has better movement than we're used to in Ubisoft's usual FPS titles, making the game a lot more fun to traverse and actually making use of the gorgeous world they've built. Pandora is a world worth exploring most of the time, and that's why it's equally disappointing when you get stopped in your tracks. I tried to fly north on my mount, but a huge invisible wall had other plans. On another occasion, I saw columns of smoke rising above the treetops, so rushed over to see what was going on. I found a processing plant and it was locked behind level 20. It wasn't too far from the start of the game, and I was only level 4. Now, rather than giving me the opportunity to go into this high level area and just get absolutely wrecked, The game just told me to go away and come back later. And that's not exactly freedom of play, is it? Now, to be fair, as I found out later, outposts even a few levels higher than you are can become borderline impossible, with enemies that one-shot you from miles away the second you get spotted. The only way to actually beat them is sneaking around and hacking turrets so you don't get instantly murdered, so they encourage a really boring playstyle that isn't really worth the effort. So maybe it's a good thing then that you're kept away from those harder challenges, but it's frustrating no matter which way you look at it. The game rarely gives you the freedom to experiment with your playstyle and change up your tactics, sometimes just completely blocking you from going anywhere new, and when you do get the opportunity to try, you'll probably just get steamrolled. It wasn't long before I saw repeated structures and tasks either. And look, it was inevitable Frontiers of Pandora would recycle its content across the map, but seeing identical mining drills right away, that's a bit jarring. Even the structure of the terrain around the drill was identical, down to the placement of the ammo crates and the soil beneath my Navi's feet. And again, this just damages your sense of immersion, which is otherwise Avatar's strongest element. What isn't its strongest element is the hacking. This game has an absurd amount of hacking. Massive Entertainment clearly thought players would enjoy pointing a weird device at computers, because that is what you're going to be doing for half of this game's quests. It's a stupidly boring mechanic, and it shows up constantly. It's abundantly clear the hacking gameplay was used to pad out the game, and it suffers all the more for it. And unsatisfying progression makes these gameplay issues even more glaring. As you play, you're going to pick up recipes for better gear or find stronger items on your travels, but your playstyle is barely going to change. Most new gear only gives you minor stat boosts like 5% wildlife damage or other insignificant upgrades. My playstyle, using shock arrows to stun mechs then tearing the pilot out, was fun for a while, but it left the game with less options than we'd really like. There's only a couple of skills you can unlock that actually grant interesting abilities, and most just offer extra health or more carrying capacity, options that really only exist to make the game less annoying to play. Hunting for better crafting materials is something that should appeal to a subset of players more than the repetitive outpost content. Tracking down beasts or searching for rare ingredients can be quite soothing, especially when you allow yourself to get absorbed by the world around you. And being able to call your mount to you at any time is a pretty cool feature as well. The hunting and gathering also feeds into the premise of the game and the story of its protagonist. You are thrust into the role of a Navi raised by humans and then forced to reconnect with your roots in nature, discovering what materials are used for what or how to take down beasts cleanly. These things are a learning process for us, just as they are for your character, and it feels good to expand your knowledge of the world. Sadly though, this learning process is often let down by the storytelling. The tale this game tells is occasionally hard-hitting, but generally too poorly paced to be actually enjoyable. It's got a lot of quests to sift through, and some feel like little more than distractions, with NPCs telling you things you will forget. The side quests are often even more generic, and some just aren't worth doing. Now, the Na'vi NPCs do a lot of heavy lifting in this game. There's some strong voice acting and a massive amount of charisma and fierceness that is utterly absent from the human cast. Some characters just fade into the background, and there are far too many to keep track of. One character that we spoke to once over the radio sacrificed themselves in a mid-game mission, a moment with absolutely no gravitas at all, since the only thing that we could think was, sorry, who was that? And other characters are just irritating, and the interruptions over comms are insufferable. You'll be exploring the forests of Pandora, just basking in the silence and tranquility of nature, when a character pops up in your ear and tells you a terrible knock-knock joke. And you're going to hear the same lines repeated too. Again, an awful inclusion that really harms the game's immersion. And that repetitive quality is going to, ironically, come up a lot. There are tons of little activities to partake in, from freeing trapped animals to following moths towards hidden items, but like the outposts, they get really stale after a while. The word of the day is repetitive, and so much of Frontiers of Pandora fits that description. Even the enemy variety is scarce, with soldiers and mechs being really your only adversaries for most of the game's content. Their AI is poor, and their sightlines are so short you can basically stand in front of them and remain unseen as long as you keep a decent bit of distance. Although I will say it is fun to send soldiers flying with a single punch. But if that's all your combat's got going for it, it's not going to break any molds, is it? It's tough to come to a final score for Frontiers of Pandora because there is a lot to like, but there's just so much wrong with it as well. If it weren't for the sights of Pandora drawing me in, I would have lost interest in this game a lot sooner than I did, and it's an incredibly safe title. It doesn't know how to let players explore to their heart's content without damaging the game's progression, and the discoveries I made were usually things I'd already seen, and the main quest wasn't exactly compelling enough to grab my interest either. Sadly, all these factors combine to create a very pretty but very bland experience. The slower pace of exploration was a nice twist at first, and being able to fly above the trees to floating islands fulfills a fantasy that we didn't necessarily know that we had. When the world was able to capture me, this game becomes a fun and joyous experience. But when you stick to the main content, when you're grinding outposts or finding crafting materials, it feels instantly dated and very played out. We give Frontiers of Pandora a 3 out of 5. So there you go. Will you be picking up Frontiers of Pandora when it drops? And while we've got you here at GG Recon, if you're looking for more news, views and opinions on the latest games, check out these videos here.